I shall be speaking in English throughout this entire episode. Well, as cases continue to rise in the country due to the highly transmissible Delta variant, the easiest thing to do is point fingers and start the blame game. That is highly understandable from lay people who would perhaps in their fear and insecurity wish to find a way by which they could pin the blame on others. And of course, in this age of social media, this is also a great opportunity for those who would wish to gain fame or notoriety by posting incredible and sometimes ludicrous opinions on social media. But then we will have to understand them because, well, some of them are truly fearful for their lives. Others are taking this opportunity to gain their 15 minutes of fame in an otherwise humdrum and ordinary life. But then it gets tragic when so-called medical experts, those that have been advising the IATF for a year and a half now, and from whose expert opinions the IATF has formulated their omnibus guidelines. It gets tragic when one medical expert chooses to sweepingly blame one place, one island, in order to explain away what perhaps they might have, shall we say, failed in actually controlling or at least containing the transmission of this Delta variant. I refer to no other than Dr. Edsel Salvana. In one of his expert statement and highly irresponsible sweeping statement, he says, despite the President's directives, Cebu remained in favor of their less stringent protocols. Some IATF, EID, and TAG members, including myself, yes, you were here with us, went to Cebu at the end of June and presented the threat of Delta to the Cebu Provincial Board. We warned that if Delta got into Cebu due to lax border control, a bad surge was forthcoming. Delta is now in Cebu, causing a large spike in cases, overwhelming their healthcare system. I think the only accurate and honest thing in this very sweeping presentation is, yes, Delta is now in Cebu. He goes on further, not satisfied with hitting Cebu once, and says, we warned that if Delta got into Cebu due to lax border control, a bad surge was forthcoming. Delta is now in Cebu. No debate about that, because it's now not just in Cebu, it's in the NCR, it's in other provinces, Luzon and other provinces in the Visayas as well as Mindanao, causing a large spike in their cases, overwhelming their healthcare system. Some, and this is very bothersome, of the Delta outbreaks in Mindanao have been linked through whole genome analysis to returning Filipinos who entered through the Cebu airport. I suppose you have names, Dr. Salvana? I suppose you have the flight numbers and that these actual samples actually belong to identified ROFs or OFWs that actually arrived on specific named flights in the Cebu airport? I hope you do. Because it is one thing to give such a sweeping statement, it's another thing to prove it. While it might have been impossible to completely stop Delta from coming in, it could have been further slowed down. So now you are blaming Cebu. I hope you really have your facts straight. Because let's examine the timeline. And you can check your own notes. You can check the news. Because these are all statements coming from the Department of Health that lands in the news. We just bothered to research. Okay. On March 30th, 2021, Cebu Governor Gwendolyn Garcia, and that's me, issued EO 17, directing all incoming Filipino passengers to be swabbed upon arrival and should stay in accredited hotels for a maximum of 3 days should they test negative of the infection. This order would be later known as the province's swab upon arrival. When we issued this, March 30, EO 2017, can you do a split screen and show this? The total number of cases, active cases in Cebu then, was pegged at 1,245. You see, prior to EO 17, there were 3 other resolutions. The year before, in 2020, the protocol was swabbing of all OFWs and ROFs upon arrival. And then they await results of the test. However, in January 21, 2021, IATF resolution stated that incoming passengers shall be tested upon arrival and shall be quarantined until the result of the subsequent test on the 5th day is released. So there was a second test to be done on the 5th day. And then, 5 days later, on January 26, I suppose these are all upon recommendations of you, Dr. Salvana, IATF resolution number 96 stated that unless the passenger exhibits symptoms of an earlier date, while on quarantine, RT-PCR test shall be conducted on the 5th day from date of arrival. So you took away the swab upon arrival. And recommended, since you are the recommendatory technical advisors, for a swab on the 5th day. Look at the slow increase of cases in Cebu. From 571 on January 26, there was a steady climb to a peak at 1,245 on March 30. And that was when I issued EO 17, which brought back the swabbing upon arrival protocol. This was followed in Cebu. From then on, we saw a steady drop of cases. Why? Because when you swab upon arrival, those that may possibly have been already infected are immediately detected. If you only swab on the 5th day as well, your IATF resolution number 96 had suggested, and in fact further again amended upon your recommendation by IATF resolution number 98 February 4, where you now wanted testing at the quarantine hotel facility on the 6th day from date of arrival. So no swabbing upon arrival, 6th day was now the protocol. And we saw this steady rise of active cases. After EO17, the cases dropped. And EO17 was subsequently supported by an ordinance. Let me take you back to refresh your memory. On May 6, to counter the Cebu policy, IATF issued Resolution 114 as amended by Resolution 116, which required arriving Filipinos from abroad to be quarantined for 14 days upon their arrival, where 10 days are to be spent in an accredited quarantine facility. They shall only be swabbed for COVID-19 on the 7th day from their arrival. Just imagine, you're an arriving OFW or ROF, and then you're brought to the quarantine facility. Later on, we will show you a video of how it really goes, where you are going around, you are asked to buy your necessities in Manila. This is what happened. In contact with other people, in contact with hotel staff, and yet you would never know because you would only be swabbed on the 7th day. On May 10th, the PB passed a resolution legislating swab upon arrival. On May 11th, DOH detects first Delta variant. That was your first Delta variant. Did they come and did they arrive in the Cebu airport? No. The first 2 Delta cases in the Philippines were 2 returning overseas Filipinos, a 37-year-old male who arrived from Oman on April 10, and a 58-year-old male from UAE arrived on April 19. They landed in Clark. Were isolated there and went home to Region 5. These passengers did not arrive in Cebu, they arrived in Manila. These are the passengers that would only be swabbed on the 7th day from arrival. And within those 7 days, hotel staff would not be enough. They would be contacting other OFWs. They really cannot be kept inside these rooms for that long. The case that arrived in Manila on April 10 was only confirmed as a Delta carrier on May 11th, or 1 month later. On May 15, the Department of Health reports 10 Delta variant cases, including 9 Filipino crew from MV Athens Bridge, bringing the total cases in the country to 12. The 12th case is an ROF who arrived in the Philippines from Belgium via UAE, all landing in Manila. If in fact your protocols of swabbing upon arrival were that effective, tell me why were the first cases and the ensuing cases coming from arrivals in either Clark or Manila? On May 24th, Philippines reports first death caused by the Delta variant, a 63-year-old male who was one of the 9 crew members of MV Athens Bridge in Cavite, not Cebu. Okay? We have the same first alphabetical letter, which is letter C, but Cavite is different from Cebu. Take note, there is now an increase of Delta variants, but all still in Luzon, and all still undergoing your protocol of a 7th-day swab. You can just imagine the contacts that all of these people have had before they were actually swabbed and before the results were actually out. Because if you swab on the 7th day, at most, or most optimistic timeline would be 3 days later. That's already on the 10th day. Some of these results come out on the 4th or 5th day. After that 10th day, in accordance with your protocols, they are allowed to go home to complete the 14-day quarantine. So think about it. The very first Delta variants happened in Luzon. And these Delta variants were only swabbed on the 7th day, therefore exposing so many others whom they may have had in contact with, hotel staff, even their fellow ROFs or OFWs. And these hotel staff go home to their families, not knowing that they may already have carried or have been infected. This is how community transmission or local transmission has happened. And a lot of our Delta cases now are local cases, not ROFs or OFWs. But certainly, these OFWs and ROFs who were only swabbed on the 7th day may have had infected the people that they were in contact with, because the infection was not immediately detected by adopting the swab upon arrival policy, which was your policy from the very beginning. You changed it. For the whole year of 2020, the medical experts or the technical advisors, including you, Dr. Salvana, insisted on a swab upon arrival policy, and we were okay. And yet, inexplicably, with resolution number 98, you moved it, swabbing, to the 6th day, and then followed by resolution 114, which moved it even further to the 7th day. But over here in Cebu, we continued the swabbing upon arrival. Now, according to you, the rationale that the swabbing should be done on the 7th day, because according to you, that is when you have the highest viral load, 7th day. But that is based upon the ludicrous and illogical assumption that all of our OFWs and ROFs who arrive coming from different environments, different backgrounds, different flights, all arrive with day 1 reckoning insofar as viral load is concerned. You are saying that they all come with a clean slate and that they arrive regardless of perhaps others are already infected. You are saying that they should all be reckoned on day 1. And so, you put away the swabbing upon arrival and then illogically insisted on swabbing only on the 7th day. But what if this OFW was already infected? And yet, you could only detect it on the 7th day. Or you only swab them on the 7th day. Test results come out 4 or 5 days later. By then, they may already have gone home. Because according to your protocol, it's a 10-day quarantine in the hotel, and then complete the 14-day quarantine, 4 days at home. During the 7th day to 10th day stay in the hotel, think of the infection that may already have spread to those that this particular OFW may have had in contact with. Fellow OFWs, hotel staff, and others. Now remember, Dr. Salvana, on May 27, the flights to Cebu were diverted. There was a memorandum from the Executive Secretary dated May 27, stating that all international flights bound for Mactan Cebu International Airport shall be diverted to the Ninoy Aquino International Airport effective 001 hour of 29 May 2021 until 23:59 hour of June 5, 2021. And so we had no flights from May 29th until June 5. After that, the flights were again diverted. On June 5th, there was an extension as issued by the Executive Secretary Medialdia, stating that this office hereby extends the diversion of international flights inbound for MCIA to the Ninoy Aquino International Airport until 23:59 of 12 June 2021. You remember that? The flights were in fact diverted. We had no incoming OFWs and ROFs. And because of this, even our own OFWs and ROFs had to land in Manila. Considering that the additional volume of passengers had not been anticipated, this caused a shortage of hotel rooms, which was why stories reached us of OFWs or ROFs being brought by buses to as far away as Tarlac or even Tagaytay. At times, the bus filled with OFWs and ROFs would have to stop twice or thrice at 2 or 3 hotels begging for rooms. Which is why I think you saw this viral video of one Cebuano who landed in Manila where protocols were not that strict. In fact, upon reaching the hotel, he was told to go out to the convenience store to buy his essentials because he would be quarantined for 10 days. Do you have that video? Let me show you this briefly, just to remind you. Can you play it?
Yes.
Play it, please.
So, before mag-quarantine, mamalit sa ako diri. Uy, klaro gid no? Kaya pwede mo ko mamalit. Kaya inigsaka ko, dali na ko na ko pakanaugon. Pero pwede pa ko mamalit. What if positive ko? Anyway, mo ako sabot. Sasakto gyapon ko si GWEN.
And so it ends with a question, what if I were positive? And there he was. And how many times was this replicated by so many other returning Filipinos or OFWs? You know what your protocol was in Manila that you have so highly touted as being the effective one, and yet Delta cases were first spotted in Manila. If in fact your 7th-day swabbing was really that effective, tell me this. Why were the very first cases detected on arrivals in Manila? Here's another one. Let me read to you some pertinent portions. FYI, for those abroad or with relatives abroad, wishing to come to the Philippines, a personal account of someone who just arrived at NAIA from the US. It is such a hassle to arrive in the Philippines from abroad. As soon as plane arrives, we have to wait inside the airplane for a doctor and his staff to check everyone's temperature and vaccination records. The most stupid thing is that vaccination from the USA is not considered as grounds for a shorter quarantine. Only vaccinations in the Philippines. This was before you amended that only vaccinations in the Philippines would be accepted. At any rate, let me go further. Then we had to go down and be ushered to the airport where, and this is all caps, they made sure that we prepay the swab test to be conducted on the 7th day, exclamation point. I am just wondering why arrivals in Manila were made to pay for the swab test. Over here in Cebu, the swabs are conducted for free by the Department of Health. They did not have to pay for the swab test. But in Manila, they were made to prepay the swab test. The clear money maker, his words, not mine, I am just reading. The clear money maker is that we pay this Detoxicare company na never heard. We found out that Detoxicare contracts out the job. For example, one of them is Makati Med. They are agents only. Ay nako, since we are on quarantine, we cannot take outside transpo. So we asked a hotel for a sedan or equivalent transpo, the cheapest of which cost 2,200. A van cost 3,500. They contracted all transfers to an outside company or companies, not from the hotel. Our pickup was done by a company owned by a certain Cecilia Castañeda. Pangwarta na naman. His words, not mine. The test is 4,000 per person. But we get senior discount, we paid 3,200. That's the protocol that you have been insisting on. And that was what happened in Manila. Swabbing only on the 7th day, and yet all ROFs made to pay ahead 4,000 pesos, which should otherwise have been free, because over here in Cebu, we did not charge a single centavo for the swabbing upon arrival. Let me bring you back to the timeline just to refresh your memory. So, from May 27, 2021, from May 29, 2021, until June 12, 2021, there were no flights arriving in Cebu. All flights were diverted to Manila, where all OFWs and all ROFs were swabbed only on the 7th day. Think about it. The daily arrivals of ROFs and OFWs in Manila is 1,500. Add to that the arrivals that should have been swabbed upon arrival here in Cebu, but because the flights were diverted, these passengers had to go to Manila and subjected only on the 7th day of swabbing. That would have been an additional 800 passengers. So 1,500 plus 800, that's 2,300 to 2,500 daily of OFWs and ROFs being sent to quarantine hotels, not really knowing whether they already were carriers because they were not swabbed upon arrival. And as they go to their separate and respective quarantine facilities, they get in contact with hotel staff. They get in contact with other OFWs because the hotel staff are not enough to strictly implement. They're staying inside the room only. And these hotel staff that they come in contact with, they go home to their families. And then, if in fact this OFW was already carrying the Delta variant, there you see the explosion. You could have slowed it down. Could you have slowed it down? If you would only swab on the 7th day, how? Tell me. In fact, your policy of insisting that it should be a swab on the 7th day was what caused this explosion. Why? Because you based that policy on the faulty and illogical presumption that all ROFs and all OFWs that arrive in the Philippines should be reckoned as day 1. When these people are coming from different environments, coming from different countries, and are not similarly situated in terms of viral load. So, we had no flights from May 29th. The DOH reports on May 29th, one additional Delta variant, an ROF from the UAE with an indicator address in the Cordillera Administrative Region. On June 21, 4 additional Delta variants, ROFs. On July 6, 2 more, all coming from Luzon. Okay. Because you insisted, in fact, I had talked with the President and tried to explain, and he was very understanding of the plight of the ROFs and OFWs and directed Secretary Duque to make a critique of the Cebu protocol. And yet, you still recommended that your protocol of the dangerous protocol of swabbing only on the 7th day continue. So that on June 19, 2021, all government agencies were ordered to follow the 7-day swab as per your recommendation, and to strictly enforce the 10-day quarantine in the hotel. On June 21, I reminded, and I issued EO 23, reminding all government agencies that there is an existing provincial board ordinance that we should have a swab upon arrival. And that for Cebuanos, on the 3rd day, if the test results come out, they continue their home quarantine. Mind you, Dr. Salvana, and we have the names here. We have our data here. We were applying this to Cebuanos. For those that were coming from, that had to return to other regions, many of them were quarantined for the full 10 days because the provinces or cities insisted and would not issue a letter of acceptance. So it was the returning OFWs and ROFs that were transiting through Cebu that were quarantined in our hotels. And we have the data to show you that. Now, after my EO 23, which reminded all government agencies of an existing ordinance that must be followed, on June 22, in deference to the President himself, because I shall always respect the office of the President and President Digong. I announced that I would be setting aside my Executive Order 23, which would have continued the swabbing upon arrival for Cebuanos only, not for the other arriving Filipinos coming or going home to other provinces, for Cebuanos, since this was a Cebu Provincial Board ordinance. I set aside that EO, which would have insisted on a swabbing upon arrival, and upon a negative test result, Cebuanos may be allowed to continue their quarantine in their respective towns in Cebu. But that EO that I issued June 21, 2021, I immediately set aside the following day out of respect to the President. Therefore, up to today, the protocols that are being followed are your protocols, except that I insisted that insofar as Cebu arrivals are concerned, there must be a swabbing upon arrival, so that we immediately set aside those that are already positive. And then a second swab on the 7th day is done. All these while we religiously follow your protocol, but further enhanced by our swabbing upon arrival. You say that you came to Cebu at the end of June. You must have forgotten that when you came here, the pervading protocol was your protocol. That we were no longer releasing even Cebuanos after the 3rd day when the test results come out. That all had to undergo your mandatory 10-day quarantine at the chosen hotel. Although the difference perhaps between Manila and Cebu is we do not charge 4,000 because we don't have an agent here for the swab test. It's the DOH that conducts the swabbing. So there's no charge. And there are 2. We swab twice, upon arrival and on the 7th day. And by the way, they are brought to their quarantine hotels not by chosen car companies where they have to pay 2,200 for a sedan or 3,005 for a van. They are brought by duly designated transportation where they do not have to pay. You came over. That was on June 29, 2021. We met together with the members of the provincial board, together with Secretary Duque, Secretary Galvez, Secretary Nograles, and Secretary Michael Dino. You came along, Dr. Salvana, together with the other technical advisors. And we were hoping that we could arrive at a win-win situation. What was the win-win situation that we asked? Not for others that needed to go home to their province, other provinces, to follow that swab upon arrival and then continue the rest of the quarantine at their homes, but only for Cebuanos. Since this was a Cebu provincial ordinance. The win-win situation that we had asked, and that is all recorded, was allow us to do this for the Cebuanos because we are accountable to the Cebuanos. But still, no go. Your recommendation still was no. your protocol followed in Manila, where the first Delta cases appeared, should be followed. And so, up to now, all arriving OFWs and ROFs need to undergo the 10-day quarantine period at the designated hotels. The only difference is no added costs, as what this returning Filipino had complained of, because over here the swab test is for free. We don't have Detoxicare. So our Cebu protocols never really took off. It stopped 1 week later. And then on July 4th, 2021, the first Delta variant in Cebu was detected. This was now local transmission. We had 4 detected in Cebu, but all local. I can just imagine that almost 2-week period where all flights were diverted to Manila, including those OFWs and ROFs that needed to come home to Cebu. I could just imagine that these people were, in fact, only tested on the 7th day, released 3 days later, perhaps even without a result yet, coming home to Cebu, coming in contact with other people, and this was probably how. Because you see, who can really be an expert on this? And yet, circumstantial evidence would point to these possibilities, which would explain why we have local transmissions. In Cebu, we have 7 province. I'm talking of Cebu province. 4 locally transmitted, detected July 4th. Remember, since, as you said, the highest viral load is on the 7th day, the flights to Cebu were diverted from May 29th to June 12th. On or about 2 weeks later, we detected the local transmissions of the Delta variant on July 4th. There are 3 others, so we have 7 Delta variants in the province of Cebu. And please, a little lesson in political jurisdictions, Dr. Salvana, you do not seem to have a distinction of Cebu City, Mandawi City, Lapu-Lapu City, and the province of Cebu. My jurisdiction is the province of Cebu. Do not confuse Cebu City and Cebu province. The 3 other Delta variants detected were outside Cebu, all arriving in Manila. In fact, 2 of these are still in Manila. So get your facts right. I hope that you really have the names of those that may have been affected with the Delta variant and had caused the Mindanao upsurge. And you can prove that they, in fact, arrived in Cebu via flights that landed in Cebu. Unless you can do that, you have absolutely no right to claim, as you have claimed, that The Delta outbreaks in Mindanao have been linked through genome analysis to returning Filipinos who entered through the Cebu airport. Give us the names and when they actually arrived. Because, by the way, by the same analysis, the very first outbreaks in Luzon have been identified by genome analysis to have entered through Clark and Manila. What's good for the gander is good for the goose. We have names because we researched. I hope you have the names that should back you up. So what is really the situation in Cebu? There's an upsurge. Well, you claim that you could have slowed it down. Wow, you're Superman if that's the case. Because all countries really are experiencing all of these surges. Even in a country like Israel, where practically more than half of their population have already been vaccinated. Are you going to blame Cebu Airport as well for the uptick in Israel? But you say you could have slowed it down. How? When you would only test on the 7th day. How could you have slowed it down with 2,500 Filipinos arriving and who obviously cannot be reckoned across the board as arriving on day 1 in terms of viral load? That's a very false assumption. It's illogical. It's nonsensical. So how could you have slowed it down? Perhaps precisely because you would not swab upon arrival. You took that out. That used to be your protocol. I don't know why you changed your minds. Because you would not swab upon arrival, thereby throwing away the opportunity to immediately isolate those that may already have been infected and chose only to swab on day 7. And in the interim, this particular infected OFW or ROF may have already made contact with others, from hotel staff to fellow OFWs and so on and so forth. That is why. Because it's the only sensible and logical way of explaining why, with your protocols being implemented in the Manila Airport and Clark Airport, the very first cases, in fact, spread across Luzon, not in the Visayas. If you wish, we can go on. You see, after that, there were more local cases that were detected. It was only on July 29th that the Delta variant in Cebu was confirmed and reported after 25 days. Even then, we were already following IATF protocols. You see, timeline. June 21st, we would have reverted to swab upon arrival 3 days only for Cebuanos. But in deference and out of respect to the President, because he spoke up that night, I set aside my executive order on June 22. So that next time you make such sweeping statements, be sure that you cannot be refuted. You better have your own chronological analysis set right before jumping to unsubstantiated conclusions which only further erode your credibility as an expert. So how stands the province of Cebu? Let's start first with DOH data. These are not my figures. These are the daily case bulletins of the Department of Health. According to DOH, case bulletin number 516 dated yesterday, the percentage of active cases is 5.2%. Recovery percentage is 93.1%. The case fatality is 1.74%. We are seeing, yes, an upsurge of cases. More and more, there is more and more need for hospital beds, and yet, by DOH data, the mortality rate has remained the same. Let me show you this graph that we did from January 1st, 2021 until August 12th, yesterday. As you can see, in the January 1 to January 9 period, the case fatality was pegged at 1.93%. And then it went up further to 2.16 in the February 14 to February 20 period. From 2.16, the following week, it went down to 2.14 and then 2.11, down further to 2.07 in the March 7th to March 13th period. Still, a gradual decrease until it reached in the March 31st to April 3 period at 1.69. Went up to 1.73, down to 1.71, down to 1.68, 1.66, and then went up again to 1.7, and it has been there ever since. 1.71, 1.72, 1.73, 1.74. It went at the highest, it was at 1.76, 1.77. Now it's down to 1.74. In other words, less than 2%. These are not my figures. This is the Department of Health's figures that I just collated over the 7.5-month period this year. Mortality rate continues to be below 2%. In fact, at 1.7%. That's DOH data. How does the province of Cebu stand? We have 3,818 active cases. In isolation are 2,960 or 78%, and hospitalized 858 or 22%. Of those that are in isolation, 2,408 are home isolated. 2,476 of these are mild asymptomatics of the 2,960, and those that are facility isolated are 484 or 16%. Hospitalized are 46.3 that are mild, 43.4% that are moderate, severe at 3.1%, and hospital protocol is 7.2%. Hospital protocol. Nana si Doktora? Okay. So let us just consider the first three columns, no? Mild, moderate, and severe. Because you see, hospital protocol, these are those that go to the hospital for other reasons. Perhaps for giving birth, for other operations, But because the hospital protocol states that they must be swabbed, which is why we have 7.2% that are included in those that are hospitalized but are not necessarily counted as either mild, moderate, or severe because they are there for other reasons. They just tested positive through the RT-PCR test. Our recoveries now are at 19,312, and those that have died are 1,258. But as I said, we check each death and check whether this is really COVID or there were other incidental findings. So those that died really of COVID were 282 or 1.2% of the total. Now, what we do over here is to consider the population when we look at the incidence of COVID cases. Because you see, 100 cases in a population of 200 would be a lot more serious than 100 cases in a population of 10,000. That is how the medical profession determines the incidence of cases in order to have a sense of proportion. So you determine the case incidence per a certain common number. In this case, based on DOH data, we considered the incidence per 100,000 amongst all of the provinces and cities of the Philippines. And we ranked it. Ranking is now the top per 100,000 is Mandaue with 452, Lapu-Lapu with 427, and Cebu City with 413. Number 4 is the city of Navotas with 365 per 100,000, Pateros with 352 per 100,000, city of Makati at 345, Apayao with 316 per 100,000, Pasay City 294, Ilocos Norte 287, and the city of San Juan at 266. These are the top cities and provinces in terms of incidence of COVID active cases per 100,000. Cebu Island, and when we speak of Cebu Island, that includes the province of Cebu and the Tri-Cities, Mandaue, Lapu-Lapu City, and Cebu City. Cebu Island ranks number 11. For the total population of 4,919,667, incidence of active cases is 244 per 100,000. Where is the province of Cebu? The province of Cebu is number 32 with a population of 3,276,437. The incidence of active cases per 100,000 is pegged at 147. This is lower than Bohol, which is at rank number 28. Negros Oriental is ranked number 56, and Siquijor is ranked number 90. That's insofar as Central Visayas is concerned. So yes, cases are rising, but not just in Cebu, Dr. Salvana. In fact, the city of Navotas, Pateros, city of Makati, Apayao, Pasay City, Ilocos Norte, city of San Juan, in terms of incidents, they take up 70% of the top 10. It is admitted, Mandaue City, Lapu-Lapu City, and Cebu City are the top 3 cities in ranking in terms of incidence of positive cases per 100,000 in the entire country. And there, may I repeat, these are independent, highly urbanized cities, not under the jurisdiction of the province of Cebu, and therefore not under my jurisdiction. There is a difference between Cebu province, Cebu City, Mandaue City, and Lapu-Lapu City. A little enlightenment so that we do not give out confusing statements. But I recognize that in fact, cases have arisen in Cebu province. Earlier, we were all declared by the IATF as under NECQ. I submitted an appeal, and the IATF granted my appeal, downgrading the status of the province of Cebu to GCQ with heightened restrictions. But daily, we continue to monitor cases. And for our top 10, asa naman to? We are, in terms of incidents again, because that is how we analyze. We do not rank in accordance with the number of cases, but of active cases, but in accordance with the incidence of active cases. In this case, because populations of some towns are less than 100,000, we consider the incidence in terms of 10 per active cases per 10,000. Ay magtong atong kuan. At any rate, let me assure you that I have acted for 11 local government units because the IATF under resolution number 39 dated April of 2020 grants authority to the governor to declare ECQ for the local government units, municipalities, and component cities within the jurisdiction of the province. I have issued an executive order that upgraded the quarantine classification of 11 local government units, including 3 component cities. Under the MECQ, which I had upgraded through EO, here in Cebu, we have come up with an MECQ with heightened restrictions classification. We adopted all of the prohibitions and restrictions under the MECQ classification of the IATF's guidelines, but we went further than that. Where lies the heightened restrictions? First of all public transportation are now required to be open air. No more air-conditioned buses, minibuses, commuter vans, even taxis. Because, as we have been repeating and been told so many times, this virus can be aerosolized and can stay in the air for several hours in a cramped, secluded place. And that's what happens in air-conditioned buses, where we have seen that the transmission rates are highest. So now all air-conditioned buses are no longer allowed unless they put down their windows for ventilation, free and easy ventilation. Furthermore, we are requiring all bus personnel, drivers and conductors to wear personal air purifiers. We have tried the face mask, the face shield, the physical distancing. And yet now we continue to be besieged by COVID-19. And since this virus is airborne, then perhaps we may now use, in addition to our established health protocols, turn to science and technology, to air purifiers that in fact create a safer atmosphere, in that negative ions that catch pollen, viruses, microbes, bacteria, and neutralize it can be achieved through air purifiers with HEPA filters and personal air purifiers. In the province of Cebu, even LGUs under GCQ with heightened restrictions, all establishments, whether service establishments or work environments that are enclosed, must have air purifiers with HEPA filters proportionate to the floor area of that particular establishment. All employees and all workers must also wear air purifiers. All drivers and conductors of all public transport must wear air purifiers. And all of our buses are strictly made to conform to the 75% designated seating capacity. For that, we have set up checkpoints in all of our 50 local government units. The PNP is on board to check all public transports, that they follow the no aircon, open windows policy, as well as that all drivers, conductors wear air purifiers, and that buses and minibuses and other mass transports shall limit passengers to the approved seating capacity, which is placed right at the windshield as computed in accordance with the OTR rules. Since the province of Cebu controls or operates both the North Bus Terminal and the South Bus Terminal, we are then able to closely monitor these buses. The checkpoints are also there to see to it that there will be no overloading. We are doing this. These are proactive steps. Instead of doing the blame game, we are facing this challenge and looking at how we may be able to surpass this. Perhaps this is how we should proceed, not by trying to point fingers, especially if, as a technical expert or advisor, a so-called medical expert, whose opinions and recommendations have been adopted by the IATF for over a year and a half now, and yet we still have this. Maybe it's time for introspection and ask yourself whether you have in fact succeeded or you have miserably failed. Are you so insecure about that 7th-day swab, which exposed so many others to possible infected ROFs or OFWs, that you had to try and shift the blame to Cebu, and talking about lax border controls? You say, in spite of the directive of the President? I have always respected the President. And in fact, when he said, we will follow your protocols, I immediately set aside the executive order. So that is a blatant lie. There was never any directive coming directly from the President that we have not followed. Do not try to mislead the public. What other proactive measures have we done? right now in all of our ports of entry, for all arriving passengers, including personnel carrying cargo, should carry with them a negative RT-PCR test or taken not more than 72 hours earlier, or a negative antigen test taken not more than 48 hours earlier. And we continue to study the situation. We do not fly off the handle when we see a sudden uptick in one town. We study the situation in a certain designated period, which is how we were able to identify. When we look for the highest incidence per 10,000 and rank our municipalities and cities accordingly. All of our municipalities and cities have their own TTMFs, which the province of Cebu has provided 1 doctor and 2 nursing attendants or 2 midwives each, aside from air purifiers with HEPA filters and oxygen with regulators. We're talking here of 50 TTMFs. We have added capacity to all of our provincial hospitals and district hospitals. And though we have increased cases, nobody is denying that. That's everywhere. Even St. Luke's has already put out a sign that they will no longer accept COVID cases. As far as the province, and again, for the nth time, for those that are still uneducated about this, Cebu province is different from Cebu City. Cebu City is not under my jurisdiction or control. It is only Cebu province with its 6 component cities: Talisay, Naga, Karkar, Danao, Toledo, and Bugo that are under my jurisdiction, together with 44 municipalities. But we continue to work with our mayors, and we are one. We are united in this fight against COVID-19. We do not point fingers, but we assume accountability because we are the elected ones, not some faceless, unelected expert who makes sweeping general statements and recommends protocols without knowing what the situation actually is on the ground. So, thank you for your attention. I repeat, please substantiate your statements, Dr. Salvana, because we have our own figures and we have our own timeline. You can counter-check that of when the actual first cases spread throughout Luzon. And kindly review the swabbing only on the 7th day. In Cebu, we continue to swab on the first day, even as we follow, as directed by the President, the IATF-EID protocol of full 10-day quarantine in these designated hotel quarantine facilities. That is to set the record straight. Well, thank you for staying with us. This has been quite a long episode, but I needed to clarify things and set the record straight. I needed to speak up for Cebu, and I hope that with our presentation of facts and data, the innuendos and sweeping statements of someone who considers himself an expert would be now clarified, and that after all, there really needs to be a revisit of the 7th day swab, 7th day only swab of arriving OFWs and ROFs. A swab upon arrival would certainly have slowed down the spread of the Delta variant, because with a swab upon arrival policy, we would immediately have detected those that were already infected upon arrival. Thank you, my dear Cebuanos, my fellow Filipinos. Thank you, and let us together join hands, try to find a better way instead of pointing fingers and blaming others in exchange of our own insecurities. That just shows that perhaps deep down there really are questions about certain protocols that continue to be followed. Why don't we instead be more proactive and look for ways by which we may be able to face this challenge, and more importantly, to succeed and prevail over this challenge. That's the Cebuano way. Mabuhi ang Cebu. Mabuhi kitang tanang mga Cebuano. Daghan kaayong salamat.